So this is really a retreat, a course on the theme, on the subject, exploring the themes of eros and desire and the alchemy of desire. And so I want to take a little time now over the next few talks to begin to delineate what we mean when we use this word eros, what we mean when we use this word eros. So to begin to do that, as you'll quickly see, the way we're using that word is actually woven in with a whole web, if you like, a whole dynamic web of other words that we're using, quite specifically, related ideas, related notions, related experiences. So we'll have to kind of gradually unfold all this, unpack it, if you like, or gradually, reverse analogy, build a framework, an architecture that will help us here build our ship or our vehicle. So in the course of doing that, and explaining or unpacking a little bit, elaborating is a better word, elaborating a bit on what we mean by eros and what it involves and what it implies, etc., where it goes. In the course of delineating, the question comes up, why? Why delineate? And we touched on that briefly already, but there's actually more to say. Why make this extra delineation of something called eros? And because we have a lot of words, like we said, we have desire, craving, clinging, attachment, love, So why make this extra delineation? I want to say a bit more about that. And I also want to weave into all this just some reflections on making delineations and definitions in general. So some general reflections on that, because actually it is very relevant to the whole project that we're doing and where it can go. So, unless you teach in some way or other, in some subject or art or whatever it is, it may not be obvious to you, but it's obvious to me that teaching is always contextual. So that in talking about eros now, there is the context, there's a double context at least. One is the context of how did we get here? What is it that led up to these kind of delineations, and making the delineations and the justifications and the explanations that we're about to go into slowly, gradually, that comes out of a whole trajectory, a whole progression of exploration and insight that in a way led, one thing led to the other, one thing unfolded another. So there's the context of where we're coming from. And in a way, and as I'll go into this later, I'm coming from a background in insight meditation, but a certain way of understanding and approaching what insight meditation is and what the Dharma is and how to think of that. But there's also the context of who one is talking to, who one is teaching, and the context in which one teaches. So that teaching about eros and desire and shining a different light on them in a Buddhist context and in an insight meditation context is a certain context. It's not necessarily the easiest, almost straightforward context to raise these issues and hope to have some fresh, bring some fresh illumination or fresh turning of the earth, if you like. There's other context, for instance, in psychotherapeutic context or philosophical context, if you like, that where in a way it would be much more straightforward. There would still be distinctions and things to make, but in some ways the context that we're in makes it more challenging, but also we're lent certain advantages, I think, by our practice and by our understanding that other disciplines and directions don't have. But about the context, I remember an international meeting of insight meditation teachers in 2009, I think it was. It actually took place at Gaia House, so it happens every, I don't know, three years, something like that, 3 or 4 years, and it kind of rotates between 3, maybe 4 centers, IMS and Spirit Rock and maybe Beatenberg, I can't remember, around the world. And that year it was at Gaia House, and maybe, I don't know, 80 insight meditation teachers, I can't remember. Very senior ones all the way down to very, very new teachers. And from all over the world. And, well, actually, mostly Europe and America, USA. So part of that group, we had like 3 or 4 days together, I think, and there were different discussion groups that were sort of offered. So periodically we would break and certain themes would be offered, and then the people interested in this theme would go and make a little group and discuss it for a while, and people interested in another theme would go and make their little group and discuss it. And one day, one of the themes that was offered was Eros. So there's a couple of things to me that are interesting about what happened. One is that it was by far the biggest discussion group. So there was enormous interest in that topic, so much so that actually I think the group of people, the subgroup of the larger group that were interested in Eros and elected to go into that group had to be divided into 3 to make them manageable discussions and interesting and worthwhile. So I was in a group that I think had at least 10 people in it, and there were maybe 2 others like that. So that was the first thing. Look how much interest there was in this topic in Buddhist practitioners, Buddhist teachers, insight meditation teachers, already in 2009. And partly is because so little is said in it, about it in our tradition. So that was the first thing that was interesting. The second thing to me that was interesting was, so we gathered in our group of, let's say 10 people, I can't remember, 10, and 10 teachers, and a few of us, several of us said, well, hold on, before we get into this, can we actually just kind of say or agree what we mean by Eros? And immediately it became very apparent that there was no common. We had come to this group with quite a large range of what people thought Eros meant, or what it meant to them. No one was particularly attached to it means this or anything like that, but there was really not a clarity or a common shared meaning even. So I remember one teacher just seemed to equate it with desire in general. And if I understood her correctly, she was saying that her approach to this was, again, not very conventional Dharma, but it's more like, let the students have their desires. So if you want that chocolate cake, have the chocolate cake. If you want this or that, have it. And in having it and feeling it and exploring it and going into that experience, over time, this was the theory, that their desires would mature. And so instead of being caught up with superficial and kind of unhelpful desires, there would be this maturation through actually going into the desire, living it, experiencing, tasting, etc., following the thread of desire. There would be this maturation until they would get clear and centered on their deepest heart's desires. So starting with the Mars bars and eating them and whatever, eventually there would be this funneling down and natural maturation process that would help. Now that's probably not a fair summary of what she was saying, and I might have misunderstood. But anyway, she seemed to equate Eros and desire. And another teacher made the distinction, saying this is all very well, this is a little later in the group, saying, Eros, what I'm more interested in is in thanatos, he said. And thanatos, for some of you will know, is another Greek word. Eros is a Greek word. And in, I think it's Freudian psychoanalytic theory, Eros is sometimes equated with the life instinct, the instinct to want to live, and contrasted with thanatos, the drive towards death, the death instinct, which Freud introduced later into his psychoanalytic theory. And this teacher was saying, interestingly, came to the group to hold the other pole, if you like. I'm interested in thanatos, in the death instinct. And I don't think he meant death per se, more as in the unfabricating that we were talking about, the movement away towards a kind of dissolution, nibbana in the traditional sense. And related but very different to that, and I can't remember what order this happened in, another teacher, there were quite a few senior teachers in this group, by the way, another teacher said that the Buddha's primary interest, or he was trying to persuade people that the Buddha's primary interest was in addressing Mara, the sort of primordial, if you like, archetypal villain in the Pali Canon, Mara, and Mara actually means death, and so the Buddha was interested in Ammara, which is also a word that's in the Pali Canon less commonly, but it's there. Ammara, which this teacher was saying is in contrast to Mara, because it's a negation. Is not death, therefore it means life. So what the Buddha is really teaching is life, live, be in your life, etc. And the sort of elevation of, well, I actually pointed this out to him, but the elevation of this concept of life, that it becomes a kind of substitute for an idea of God or divine, which this teacher was very much against. But there was this equation of Eros with life, as opposed to death, and the Buddha was very interested in life and the sort of praise of life, if you like. And it turned out that the person, I think, who even suggested the topic in general at first, when it came to her turn and what she meant by Eros, she was actually quite unclear and sort of said she didn't know, but then we sort of just tried to elicit from her a little bit, and it turned out that what she really meant was that when she was teaching, she found that she kind of got into a mode where there was very little humor and very little sort of joke telling, etc. And more than that, there was very kind of not the juiciness of humor. So that's what she meant. There's this huge range, and I don't think, of course, came even to a conclusion about what we were talking about, but which is oftentimes the problems with these kind of groups. But that was another thing that was interesting to me, that there was no clarity even about what is meant. So this is why a little bit I want to go into this, partly because it's a topic that people are interested in, and maybe especially people who've been practicing a long time. Why? Because they recognize the lacuna there, the gap, presumably, in the teachings around this subject. And secondly, we can't really go into it until we kind of start to say, what are we talking about here, or can we decide what we're talking about and see where that leads us. So, Eros, as we are using it on this retreat, and as I would want to conceive of it, it certainly has a relationship with desire. With the notion of desire. The notion of Eros and the notion of desire are clearly related, but let us say, and we can come back to this, that Eros is a kind of desire, specific, is still very wide what it can mean, but it's a specific kind of desire. So a subset of desires are erotic desires, if you like. And desire, if it's not already clear to you or clear from the first few talks that we gave, desire is very interesting and not simple. And desire in the Dharma is also not simple. So I don't think we really went into this in the first three talks, but the Buddha lists in these great lists that he comes up with, and factors of awakening and this and that. There's a list called the Four Bases. The four bases of sometimes of power or success or accomplishment, and desire is one of those. So it's listed, and the Buddha talks about it as a lot. It's listed. If you want samadhi, if you want to develop the jhanas, if you want to develop the Brahma Viharas, if you want awakening, desire is a basis for that. And he lists it and points to it. This is necessary. It's important to develop this. It's important to give some intention to this. It's important to be skillful with one's desire. He does not say, just let go, do not cling, drop your desires, etc. And anyone just flicking through, again, the Pali Canon, the collection of the original Buddha's teachings, was how often words like striving and exertion, etc., come up. I've forgotten the exact Pali words, but he uses the language of striving, of ardent desire, etc., really frequently, really frequently. And just if you take the example of just of his life, he's a paradigm, a paramount example of someone really dedicated, really desiring, with what we would actually, most people nowadays in our culture would regard as an extreme passion for, in his case, for realization. And he taught the middle way between, different kinds of middle way, but his middle way in terms of the passion for awakening was not really what most people these days would consider a middle way. It was quite extreme in terms of his dedication, his devotion, his passion, his hunger and desire for realization, for awakening. So as I said, all this, what we're talking about on this retreat and the teachings about Eros and desire has a context. Now, there's also the context of things that have in areas and themes in the teachings that have interested me very much over the years, and that I have tried to share with others over the years as well. So I've talked in the past, if I remember, there's a talk called Passion and Desire on the Path, others about wise relationship to practice, I think it's called, and wise effort, looking at more the micro movement of effort and desire in, for example, samatha practice and jhana practice and that kind of thing. Other talks I can't remember. I think I might try on this retreat and do something that might be a little annoying, but hopefully is more helpful than annoying, and mention other places where you can find more about certain strands or elements of teaching that we're gonna, are involved in what we're talking about. I'm gonna mention, but maybe not fill out more, so that if you want more, you have a place to look. On this retreat, so I've talked about that before, very interestingly, the passion for the path, the passion on the path, the passion for awakening, the desire for to unfold certain experiences and insights, and how that comes into samadhi practice and metta practice and all that. So on this retreat, I also want to go into that, but specifically also, why? Here's a question that to me is interesting. We're going to unpack. I'm going to reflect on this because it's wrapped up in what we're talking about. Why is it that some people have a great passion and choose a path, or if you say a version of Buddha Dharma, that allows a great passion for realization, for deep experiences, deep insight, deep openings of consciousness. Why is it that some people have that passion and choose a version among the different versions that are sort of on the spiritual supermarket shelf, even within insight meditation, choose a version of it that allows their passion and even allows the pain that can come with that passion. So there's a pain the Buddha talked about, the can't remember his word for it, but the let's say the pain of the contemplative, I think he called it, in a sutta somewhere in the Pali Canon about equanimity. And he doesn't say, in regard to the meditator, the contemplative, who hears about other people awakening, who wants awakening but is not there yet. He doesn't say, just relax, let go, don't desire, drop it, too much passion. He doesn't say that. He said, yeah, that's how it is, until you realize. What you need to do is keep going until you realize. Then your passion will be quenched. So it's often quite a different message, or that we're getting, or interpretation that we're putting on the teachings. So why is it that some have this passion, and some choose a version that allows that passion even when it's painful, and some don't? Some don't seem either to have that passion or move away, choose a version where it just bypasses, if you like, or tranquilizes or deflates that passion. And some choose a path or a version of the Dharma where actually not a lot of passion is needed. The vision, the notion or idea or fantasy of awakening involved is actually not that remarkable. It's almost something for your spare time, if you like. It's not really a big deal. It's quite a small vision of awakening. And some people don't seem to have an interest or a desire. There's not much libido, if you like, towards awakening. In general, they don't talk about it. They don't listen to talks that mention it. When it's talked about, they'll just lose interest. They'll actually say, I've heard many people say to me, I'm just not interested. So that's interesting too, to me. Why? What's going on there? What's going on either in relation to those notions, or in relation to the self, or in relation to the desire, etc., to the notion of desire? Some have, on the contrary, a very high bar for what awakening means. And if when I place myself in a more traditional sort of interpretation of Dharma, I would say my where I set the bar for what awakening means is really quite high in relationship to where others set it in terms of what stream entry is and all that stuff, if you know those terms. And some people, and again I would also include myself again sort of at the edge of Dharma, would even conceive of an endlessly, if you like, expanding, not quite receding, but endlessly expanding notion of awakening. So in talks like In Praise of Restlessness, I've talked about this, and Questioning Awakening, and other talks. So that the desire is always there. The flame of desire never goes out, because there's always more. There's always a greater expansion. There's always more depth and diversity and range to what awakening is and can be. There's always new horizons of awakening opening up. So why all these differences in people? Is it just differences of personality, soul differences, if you like? Is it conditioning? Whether that's in terms of personality or education, or what people have been exposed to, the kinds of teachings, or the kind of culture, or the kind of family. Is it early childhood wounding, for example, that in how one expressed one's passion and one's love and one's desire, and the nakedness of that the infant has, often that comes out quite uninhibited. In infancy, often is it that there was a wounding there in something in school or with the family or whatever it is that caused one to block and inhibit one's desire, one's libido, one's passion. So all of this, actually, we're going to talk about more. To me, these are interesting questions. Interesting questions. The psychology involved in all of this. Why some people like that? Why others different? Why people go for this kind of path or that kind of path or that kind of notion of awakening or whatever it is. So I want to include it over the course of this retreat very much. We'll return to that periodically. In the past, I think a few years ago, I gave a couple of talks called The Beauty of Desire, part 1 and 2, I think, and if I remember, in the second part of that, I introduced something that I discovered in practice, where there's a certain way of practicing with desire, even if it's a desire not for awakening, for something else, where it might at first be uncomfortable and bring dukkha, but there's a way of practicing it that doesn't dissolve it, that respects it, opens it up more, and practicing in that way, actually respecting the desire and, if you like, empowering it without necessarily acting on it. It's talking about meditation here. Practicing this way leads to an experience where the desire does not bring dukkha, quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. It brings a kind of fulfillment and opening of the being. So that the whole way we tend to think about desire, and even if it's a good thing, it inherently brings some degree of suffering because there's tension. Not so simple. Then be revisiting and actually elaborating more on that material as part of this retreat, as part of what we're calling the alchemy of desire. And in the first 3 talks, hopefully it was clear that the whole idea of trying to live a life of non-clinging, trying to live without craving and clinging, just let go of everything, etc., in that simplistically understood way has several problems, which I'm not going to repeat now. So that too is part of the context. And also, again, it's very much, what we're talking about on this street is very much in the context of the exploration, the elaboration, and the expansion of what I've been calling imaginal practice. It's related to tantric practice, but different. And so I have talked actually a fair amount already about Eros in the context of imaginal practice. And one set of talks, I remember, what's it called? An Ecology of Love, in I think 3 or 4 parts, and talked about this dynamic, which we're really, really going to elaborate on a lot in this retreat because it's so central, such a powerful conceptual framework, and it opens up all kinds of things, allows and gives a basis to all kinds of avenues. What I'm calling the soul-making dynamic of or the Eros Psyche Logos dynamic, and I will explain more about that on this retreat, but and talk quite a bit, bring everything back to that quite a bit, but it's already been explored. So again, that's part of the context through imaginal practice. On this retreat, in a way, it's similar material, but now to what I've explored before in imaginal practice, but now want to expand that piece about Eros, elaborate more regarding Eros and its place and its potential, both in imaginal practice, what we've been calling imaginal practice, and but also in the path and for the path as a whole, and what that might mean for the path and what kind of paths that opens up. So that's a little bit of the context, but there's more even, because we could say again, why bother? Why introduce this other word, eros, when we have lots of words, as we elaborated, I think, in the part one of the first talk. Why bother? Well, that's a good question. It's really a good question. Do we really need another concept here? Let me read you something. Someone I didn't know sent me an email sometime in 2015. It was a little while before I got ill. And so just this arrived in my forwarded from Gaia House out of the blue to me by a man who lives in the Yukon in Canada. So Arctic Circle, I think. And I'll read you all the email just because there's so much insight here, and it's so in what he's saying, and he captures a lot of the themes that we're going to touch on, and highlights the necessity, and in a way answers this question of why bother. So I'll read it all. If you can listen quite carefully, because it's very well, very well articulated, very very beautifully written, and as I said, a lot of insight packed into what he's saying, in all kinds of ways. So, dear Rob, my name is X. You don't need to know his name, and we've never met. By the way, I asked his permission to use this email in teaching, and he was really fine with that. And I'll say this now, and I hope you can remember this, because I won't say it every time. When I use examples from other people in the past, if you have heard me do that, or in this retreat, or in the future, generally speaking, I mean, almost without exception, I've asked the person involved if I could, and they have said yes, almost without exception. Okay, so. My name is X, and we've never met. I have recently been reading your book and listening to some of your talks, as recommended by my current teacher, Y. Interesting stuff. Okay. I found myself being challenged and derailed by some of your approaches to the Dharma, often in a quite uncomfortable manner. This isn't really the bit that I want to read to you, but this is actually relevant, so I'm going to read it anyway, it's just short. This made me realize how easily I tend to align my whole perspective with certain specific sets of ideas and points of view without daring to shake it up. But you woke up the rebel in me, the iconoclast, and I'm grateful for this. Because that's not so, well, it is relevant, but not the main part. It's really this. So he continues, I'm quite new to the Buddhist path, having only been formally practicing for about 3 years now, but I dived straight into it. I've spent most of the last year as a monk, both in Myanmar and France, before disrobing with the idea of closing my worldly life and ordaining again this upcoming fall. I was quite committed to the idea until I fell in love with a girl who came out of nowhere and disheveled my whole world. Classic story, apparently. Now, obviously, from the monk's perspective, this is the worst thing I could have done, but somehow I can't really buy into that. Not just because romance is so sweet and compelling, but mostly because of my intuition that there is something deeper running underneath lust and love, something wider than her and me, something so beautifully alive that maybe it shouldn't be renounced so quickly. It's that same intuition that flared up every time I have fallen in love, the feeling that I'm playing a game that is beyond us, that the torrent in my chest is just running through me, unaffected by matter or time, untamed by anybody, that I'm just here as a temporary vehicle for a desire that has never begun nor ceased stretching out toward the beloved. So my specific love stories become just some personified renditions of a myth, essentially unspoken and inexhaustible. There's so much insight beauty in what he writes, and so relevant to the themes that we're going to be unraveling, unpacking, elaborating on. But he continues, and this is why I wanted to write you, because I have never heard anyone else attempting to reconcile romantic love with the Dharma, and I would like to explore this possibility in order to avoid fragmenting my life into discrete arenas. I can't honestly bring myself to set up desire and freedom against each other as mutually exclusive principles, however much this seems to be insisted upon in the Dharma, and this has been a huge difficulty in my recent attempts to engage fully with practice. I would like to start imagining an experience of desire or lust that would exceed the lack and the compulsion to fill it in, that would be unconditioned by pain, without having to impose an artificial stance of dispassion and sacrifice a dynamic force of the human heart for a peace maybe too sterile, ... And he continues, unfortunately, I feel ill-equipped for such an undertaking. My heart just dramatically bouncing from an inclination towards disenchantment, tranquility, to one of stormy passion and unreasonable attachments, constantly throwing myself off balance, completely invested into one configuration or the other. I don't really know where to start. As of now, I have recently let myself be overwhelmed by a crazy and beautiful romance. I find this really moving. All of it. Overwhelmed by crazy and beautiful romance to the point of neediness and jealousy. And I want to open this up, to let it breathe, to bring some freedom within the tension of desire itself. So I'd like to ask you if you would have any advice, any lead into how I could directly practice with this explosive heart of mine, ... Thank you kindly, and please accept my best regards. So, beautiful, beautiful email, and I was struck by this, of course, and moved, a bit busy as I was at the time, moved to write back and suggest we arrange a time to speak. And we spoke, but just for about an hour, and that was actually all we had the chance to do before I got ill, quite out of the blue as well, and had to cut down on most of my teaching. So he said, while we were talking, that before falling in love this time, he thought he'd left all that behind him and was now travelling a different path, and I was the image of that path, and he mentioned the hermit in solitude, in the peace of the woods or the mountains, and I asked him, is it peace you're after? He said freedom from ruts and from the fear of engaging. So there's a lot here, and we talked about imaginal sensibility, imaginal practice, what this meant about self-view, the possible plurality within self-view. The possibility of regarding desire as not just restlessness, as we touched on in the first talks. What else was there? Yes, we really touched on the possibilities of imaginal practice, and also on working with the energy of desire, as I was talking about in some of the beauty of desire talks. But we only could speak for an hour, and it's such a huge subject that all I could do was kind of give a few pointers, really, and suggest, I think, that we have some more contact at some point. There was another piece, actually, that this woman that he was involved in, this was part of the problem that initially instigated, this woman that he was involved with was wanting the relationship to be an open one, in other words, to be able to have sex with other people, etc. That they both were okay with that, and she wanted that, and he was very unsure about that, and very ambivalent about that. But just pointed out to him that actually, although that's certainly an issue to explore and to ponder, whether it ended up being an open relationship or not, and even whether the relationship continued or ended, is actually not the most deeply relevant thing. The more fundamental and universal questions he was asking in all this, they won't go away, whether or not the relationship's open, whether or not it continued or not. So when we say why bother with all this, well, that email gives one articulates really well one of the reasons. It wasn't enough. The contact we had was not enough to really allow those kind of questions and the wrestling that he's talking about to really be opened up and supported, and hence this retreat, and hence the teachings on this retreat and the attempt here. Because usually in insight meditation, that's the tradition he's coming from. In terms of sexual images and energies that arise, as we talked about, either they're just regarded essentially as kilesa, defilement, or distraction in meditation, or there's a sort of slightly more charitable and open, softer view that just says notice them, allow them, but certainly don't encourage them. So notice, allow in the spirit of openness, but not the encouragement. They're not sexual and erotic images and energies are not regarded as anything having any real positive place on the path. Only so much in the context that anything is, because it has a place on the path, because we're attempting in a certain framing or vision of what Dharma is, to be open to all things. Still, underneath that, it's better if, this is the subtext, we can be open to all things, but it's better if these things don't arise. It's easier, and basically just kind of let go of them. Maybe there's a kind of view of equality. They're just like anything else, to be open to be let go of, but essentially it's like everything else. Don't cling, don't get involved, don't create anything there. So insight meditation, one of its strengths is how much emphasis it puts on the feet. How many times have you heard that on retreat? Walking meditation, the feet on the ground, standing meditation, groundedness, can you feel your bum on the cushion, etc. Really, really important, And how much emphasis also in insight meditation, again, one of its beauties, one of its strengths, on the heart, the openness of the heart, the capacities of the heart, the cultivation and the centrality of the heart. And more in insight meditation circles, there's an emphasis on what we could call the head, in the sense of slowly a few strands within the insight meditation and broader insight meditation, which is really emphasizing study of the text, etc. So feet, heart, and head. Other bits might be missing. Can it involve our hips? Feet, heart, head, hips. So again, there's a kind of lacuna there, certainly around sexuality and that kind of erotics. But I really want to say, when we use the word eros, it includes sexuality in the way we're meaning what we're meaning by eros. So we include sexuality, we include sexual attraction, sexual energy, etc. But it's actually much, much more than that. We're talking about something much more fundamental, and also that can be both very intense and very subtle. So, sexual energy and sexual attraction can also be very subtle, but even more subtle than that. We're talking about something as a notion that's actually more basic and often more subtle. But again, not to overlabor the point, but why introduce this concept of eros? Why distinguish something called eros from craving or greed or desire in general? Well, it's there already. Eros is where, meaning that term, what we mean by eros is already functioning every day in our lives. It's already part of our experience, as we'll explain. Making the distinction draws out something that otherwise might not be so clear to us, and so that might shut doors if it's not so clear, if we don't draw it out. Making a distinction, or any kind of distinction, amplifies something. It amplifies, by distinguishing this from that, A from B, A and B get amplified, or one of A and B gets amplified, gets magnified. It's like you get to put it under a magnifying glass, it gets clearer. Setting it apart allows us to investigate it, to take it as a theme of investigation. If I don't delineate it in the first place, I can't take it as a theme of investigation. The delineation is the beginning of opening something up, like what would an image be? I'm not sure if this will work as an image, but like a tear, or like getting your foot in the door. You can begin then to pry open the door, or tearing a fabric to a veil, to release, reveal something. Setting it apart allows us to get in, to investigate, to become interested in it, and then we can see how it works. What is this thing? How does it work? And where does it lead? This thing that we're going to call eros, because, and this is one of our central contentions, eros will lead to different experiences, to different ends than craving leads to. So it leads to ends and experiences other than the ones craving leads to. It opens up, if you like, regions of soul, to use a certain language. Eros is very connected with soulfulness, with what we're going to call soulmaking, which I'll explain more what we mean by that, but for now let's just say the widening and deepening of a sense of sacredness, the widening and deepening and diversification of our sense of sacredness, but also has very much, this word soulmaking has much to do with meaningfulness and resonance and depth and dimensionality and beauty and all kinds of things. Eros is connected with a sense of divinity and with what we've been calling in past retreats cosmopoesis, the very sense we have, the vision, the perception of the world, the cosmos we live in, the cosmos about us, our very sense of existence. We're going to go into these terms, divinity and cosmopoesis, soul-making, etc., later in much more detail. Because they're very woven into this whole theme of eros. So that's one reason. It's in our life already, eros. We already experience it. We just need to draw it out and investigate it and see where it leads, because it does lead to somewhere other than where what we might call craving leads to. A second reason why make this delineation is to hopefully establish, or at least the potential, highlight the potential of opening to a recognition of the sacredness of eros itself. The sacredness of eros itself. Again, this is something we're going to come back to a lot. The sacredness of eros itself, we can see that. And it's very different to see that eros as sacred rather than as a defilement. And that includes also the sacredness, or at least the potential sacredness of sexuality. Sacredness never resides in this or that object or thing. We sacralize, we make something or other sacred through our relationship with it. So there's the possibility of sacralizing sexuality, rather than just viewing eros or sexuality as a defilement or as leading inevitably to defilement. And all this, as I said, is not really so adequately addressed in the Dharma at present, for the most part. We talk about sexuality and desire, but we talk a lot about desire, but in a negative way mostly. And talk about sexuality, but very little, except in terms of ethical prohibitions, for example, the precepts. Or it's admitted that it's, within sort of typically assumed limits, it's admitted that it's an aspect of life, predominantly lay life, but still there for monastics. But there isn't really this exploration, inquiry. It's not really opened up, as I said, as part of the path. As we, again, mentioned already at least once, we have this, most people have a desire for romantic love, or most people are involved in relationships or in marriages, perhaps, and a finer discrimination is needed there. This is not metta. I cannot reduce a romantic love relationship or a marriage to metta. There's something more involved. Or that needs to be involved, and part of that more is what we're going to call eros, what we're calling eros. And if I'm interested in that, if I'm really interested in really bringing a fullness of investigation, and if I'm really interested in romantic love and romantic partnerships being really integrally part of the practice, then this brings all kinds of inquiries. For example, in a long-term relationship, what keeps the eros alive? What stifles it? What kills it? What erodes it? What just allows it to fritter away? And what keeps the eros alive in a long-term relationship? So there's that second reason, that the resacralizing of sexuality, love, but also of eros, and making it more part of the path, integrally, fully, richly. But really, with all this, a third reason why, what are we doing? Why make this discrimination of something called eros is really related to what I said before. I'm interested in creating or opening an area or a direction of investigation. So I certainly don't want to just sort of, for instance, assert something like the sacredness of eros. I'm telling you eros is sacred, and then, so what? Some people will agree, some people will disagree. It's pointless. What I'm much more interested in is a domain and a dimension for really a much freer, more open and penetrating inquiry, Dharma inquiry. And always in Dharma inquiry, always there's something really fundamental to see. There's a principle that how we view something, always we see that how we view something affects the perception of that something. The ideas that I have, the preconceptions, the conceptions, the relationship with the something that I'm investigating, the area of inquiry, affects my perception of that something, and affects the experiences, the related experiences that unfold, that can unfold, or that will unfold. So all that's just, it's to do with dependent arising. The view, the way of looking, affects, it shapes the perception. Fabrication. We've talked about that as part of what we talked about before. Now, part of that, so we really have to see this dependent arising. How I view something affects my perception of that thing. So that must be part of the way that I'm inquiring. And a part of that, a part of the investigation, is perhaps this question, well, what happens? How does it affect this whole thing called eros if I view it as sacred? Even if I just try and view it, even just a little, just entertain the idea that it might be sacred. So that's a sort of subset of the investigation. What happens if? We're not asserting anything here, but it's all really in the spirit of investigation. And I'll say it one more time. We mean by eros something including, but much more than sexuality, much more than sexual attraction or energy or sexual interactions between people. You can have, there arises for us an erotic connection or erotic connections, plural, with the earth, with a tree or a piece of land, with the stars, with the cosmos, erotic connection with the divine, erotic connection, relationship with the senses, an erotic sensibility and erotic connection with materiality. Certainly with another human being, but not only humans, with other living beings. Don't have to be. Certainly also not just with others, but we can have, and hopefully we do have, and we're going to elaborate on this, an erotic connection with oneself. An erotic connection with oneself, erotic connections, plural, with oneself and aspects of oneself, faces of oneself, or the selves faces, or self faces, whatever. There can and hopefully is an erotic view, an erotic connection with the path, and with the idea or the vision, the fantasy, the notion, the concept of awakening. Certainly, always there's an erotic connection with imaginal figures, even if when it seems like there isn't. And there's even the possibility of erotic connection with ideas and concepts. So Eros pervades very broadly. Right? We mean much more than sexuality here. Eros can also be, or can seem to be, primarily, at different times, it can seem to be something primarily energetic, or primarily physical, embodied, if you like, or primarily imaginal, or primarily intellectual. Can at different times be, or seem to be, primarily all those things. Actually, I would say, it always involves all of these aspects. Eros always involves energy, what we're going to call the energy body and the energetics. It involves some kind of embodiment, or relationship with body and views of the body and sense of the body. It always involves the imaginal, and it always involves ideation, intellect, concept, what we're going to call logos. Always involves all that. So it's already something multidimensional, and we're going to go into this more. And as I said, whenever there is a sense of soulfulness, that kind of richness, resonance, depth, dimensionality, beauty, meaningfulness, in our existence, in the being, whenever there is soul-making, sacredness in our existence, Eros is involved. Eros is involved whenever there's soul-making. Now, I think it's fair to say, I think it's obvious, maybe important to say as well, that different people at different times will find these investigations that we're going into around Eros and soul-making more or less interesting. So this, to me, is interesting in itself. It does seem to me that people differ in the flavors or the characters, if you like, of the ways Eros or libido, if we say life force, expresses in their lives. They differ in the flavors, the characters, the ways Eros expresses in their lives. The fire, if you like, if Eros is a kind of fire, the fire of Eros looks and burns differently. People's soul fire burns and looks differently one to another. There's quite a range there. You know, the flaming passion, and also at different times, a flaming passion, a very steady, quiet, small but unquenchable flame, or the raging fire, whatever, you know, leaping from one thing to another, the flames. It looks and burns differently. But people also differ, it seems to me, in the amount strength and depth, if you like, of Eros, or the libido that flows through them in their life or into them, if you like. Differ in the amount, strength, or depth. So this also is complex. I mean, some people are like this, and some people are like that, and there's a range. But it's also a fact, and we touched on this before, that for all kinds of reasons, which also are interesting, Eros and libido, or life force, can be and often is blocked in our lives in different ways, inhibited at times or in certain situations, or certain expressions or along certain lines are blocked, whereas others are free, or there can be a more chronic and more pervasive blocking or inhibition of the eros and the libidos. And it's not so much that a person really, so to speak, is just a certain character or style. Something's blocking or inhibited or crushed or whatever there. Still, despite all that, despite the varying differences of interest between different people at different times and all that, I'd say that Eros is a necessary and integral aspect or element, if you like, of what we're going to be calling soulmaking, what I have in the past called soulmaking. And therefore, an inquiry into Eros is important for anyone interested, at all interested, or devoted to soulmaking. It's just part of what one needs to consider and explore and open up and go into and allow and understand and support and nourish, question. So on this retreat, on this course, the intention of the teachings is really, if you like, to open a door, open doors. And I mentioned that it's possible that certain doors are actually shut or even locked shut in the way that we're conceiving not just of Dharma but of life and of existence and of who we are and what the world is and what existence is. So the aim, broadly speaking, of these teachings, this set of teachings, is to open doors and to begin to sketch a path for those who would move through these doors and move into new territory, for those who would like to travel certain paths, and to offer a map, at least the beginnings of a map, loosely speaking, a map, a frame of reference, and light certain beacons for navigation, for those also who already find themselves in uncharted territory around Eros, around desire. They're already there, and they need some kind of orientation, some kind of way of thinking and ways of practicing, practical tools, practical subtleties of practical differentiations and navigation and steering, as all practices need. And some, as we mentioned, already see that maybe the more usual or narrow sort of ways we can interpret the Dharma or understandings of Dharma or frameworks may not be enough or are not enough to open up this territory. And some people already sense, as in the beautiful email I read earlier, already sense a holiness in desire, the holiness of desire in life or in certain areas or directions of desire, and also in imaginal practices, very common. But they sense that holiness, but it's tricky. It's tricky and not easy, and it's complex and it's rich, and help is needed, and a conceptual framework is needed, and tools are needed, and distinctions and practice instructions are needed, etc. Both on the cushion and in life and in relationship. So again, back to context, these teachings sit within a larger context of wanting to open a path that integrates a lot of elements that we've already talked about over the last few years. Imaginal practice, soul-making, cosmopoesis, this re-enchantment of the cosmos, the poetry of perception, the experience, the experiences of, and the senses of sacredness, of divinity, Eros. All this we touched before, and in fact I'm going to probably in the next talk attempt a kind of brief glossary of all these terms. Hopefully that's helpful too. This retreat, as I said, is a slightly different angle, coming from the angle of Eros, emphasizing more the Eros and expanding on more what that means. But all this, hopefully, you can see how it is integrated with, it sits fitted into, tessellated with our usual, maybe the more typical Dharma teachings about craving and letting go of craving and how craving leads to dukkha. It sits with that, alongside, mixed with that, in complement to that, and also the much more radical teachings about investigating clinging and the whole spectrum of what that notion, that word means, clinging, and all the subtleties and the beauties of working with that in practice, letting go of clinging, moving up and down the spectrum of clinging, and seeing what it does to the fabrication of the perception of self, other world, time, etc., etc. Really going deeply in practice and in the understanding, in the realization, the insight into the teachings of dependent origination at a very deep level, not the more common level, but a very deep level, and unfolding, if you like, the experience of the unfabricated and the emptiness of all things, so that existence is opened. And actually, in radical freedom, radical opening of the sense of existence, and also that, and I've talked about this before, that understanding of emptiness, let's say this, it can provide a non-realist basis for all these other explanations and explorations that we're going into. So that to the degree, to the depth that we kind of have taken to heart, understood the teachings of emptiness, how much they've penetrated the heart and the understanding, we can, to that degree, we can really practice a flexibility of ways of looking and also of conceptual frameworks. We can entertain different ideas and conceptual frameworks without having to believe in the reality of any of it. That any of these ways of looking are revealing a reality of this is how the world is, this is how I am, this is what the nature of things is, or this idea is an idea, this conceptual framework is the truth of things. So there's a real facility and flexibility of just moving between ways of looking, all kinds of ways of looking, really, really broad range, and all kinds of conceptual frameworks. So it's woven into those integrated, these teachings integrate into the usual Dharma teachings about craving and letting go and releasing dukkha, and the much deeper teachings about dependent arising and emptiness, and that forms a non-realist basis, and all that is partly what allows us to open up teachings of imaginal practice and, if you like, tantric teachings, although I make a distinction there. But Tantra is based on that understanding of emptiness. Absolutely, it's supposed to be, at least, as I've mentioned before. So all this is integrated together, and as I mentioned, there's other possibilities through imaginal practice and through the understanding of Eros of having what I would call a fuller, more adequate concept and perceptions of self, other, world, etc., existence, ways of relating and seeing and experiencing all that are more soulful, more soul-making, conducive to soul-making, that widen our, as I said, and diversify our sense of sacredness, open our senses of beauty and sacredness, divinity. So I hope you can see in all of this, and if not right now, at least at some point, you can see that this isn't really an eclecticism. I'm not sort of interested in just drawing different things together, tossing them in a pot, and kind of for the sake of being interesting, or just not being able to, kind of being restless in a not very in a kind of more superficial way. I hope you can see at some point how integrated, as I said, all these teachings are, and if you like, how necessary, how inevitable many of these teachings are because of, as I said, one way of understanding the Dharma unfolds a certain depth and a certain possibility, and that just keeps unfolding in a kind of very necessary way. So the necessary to what's gone before, but also necessary to our existence and to our practice for the future. So, maybe more typical, if you like, Dharma psychology is a sort of more let's say just the teaching of the links of dependent origination. We talked a bit about that. One of the immense strengths of the Buddha's teaching and Dharma teaching is that he kind of gives us a set of concepts, and in a way they become ways of looking. That's what these concepts are. They become ways of looking. But they serve to simplify. So Dharma concepts serve to simplify because they fabricate less. So when I use a certain set of concepts, for instance, there's less papancha, there's less of this crazy complexifying and nonsense making, if you like, entanglement. But at a deep level, too, they simplify in the sense that the Dharma concepts become ways of looking that move towards less and less fabrication. And less fabrication is a state of simplicity. So it's saying, don't think about this, don't think about that. Think in this way, and look in this way. Adopt these ways of looking, and there's a disentangling, certain amount of simplifying. Both of the ways of looking by constraining the ways of looking to certain concepts, but also then in what is seen, of course. And there's a simplifying in the perception of things, and that simplifying just goes deeper and deeper. So not just the simplicity of the isness, the so-called suchness of things, and the vividness of that, but the simplicity of our life, and then the simplicity of perception beyond the thingness of things as we go deeper and deeper into unfabricating, and eventually into something that is in effect so simple that even is or is not doesn't apply to it, the unfabricated. So, again, if I use a certain language of the soul, the psyche wants and needs, obviously, a kind of disentangling. And it certainly wants that journey into perceiving less fabrication. But there are, so to speak, other dimensions or strata of the soul, we could use that language, of the psyche, that want something else. And so other distinctions and delineations become necessary, rather than just simplicity, unfabricating, unfabricated. Rather than just the simplifying of that direction, there's so much the power of Dharma practice and Dharma concepts. Other distinctions, other delineations become necessary. What is the difference between papancha and fantasy or image in the way we're using it? Difference between daydreaming and fantasy and image. What's the difference between soul-making and the kind of simplicity of freedom that I've just talked about. What's the difference between eros and craving, or desire and eros? What's the difference between eros and love, or the Brahma Viharas? Something, I'm going to make this contention, it's something I'm really going to come back to a lot on this retreat, we're both going to come back to, something in us, something in the soul wants to know, wants to experience not just oneness, not just transcendence, or the unfabricated, the transcendence of the unfabricated, nor just, quote, life as it is, as if there really even is a life as it is, as if such a thing exists, such a thing is possible to behold. We don't just want oneness, transcendence, or that freshness of bare attention. Certainly we want more even than all that. Certainly more than the bare attention, I hope, but also more than a dissolution in oneness, and also more than the transcendence of the unfabricated, even that. So, we need a kind of more elaborate, you could say, or a slightly more sophisticated psychology. We need a Dharma psychology that both recognizes that which is already present, but which needs to be, as I said, drawn out, amplified a little more, made, recognized. So the fact, for example, that Eros is more than metta. It's not the same as craving. It's not even just wholesome desire or hitta-chanda, or desire that leads to less suffering. We need to recognize something that's already present in our life that hasn't been drawn attention to yet, highlighted, drawn out, investigated. And we need slightly more elaborate Dharma psychology because of the different kinds of sacredness and the different realms of experience which are slightly more involved. Psychology that involves concepts like Eros can open up for us, without which either these realms don't open up, and these directions don't open up, or they just get dismissed.